Questions orales, oral questions. Honorable chef de l'opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in only 100 days, the Prime Minister has gone from sunny ways to a cloudy haze, creating complete incoherence. He claims we're fighting ISIS, but then says Canada has no combat role. He claims we support Ukraine, but he wants to normalize relations with Putin. He claims he wants to create jobs, but does nothing but spend billions of dollars he doesn't have. How can Canadians have confidence in the direction of our country when this Prime Minister is so incoherent?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I had the honour and privilege of serving with the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Paul Martin, and he gave $13 billion surplus to the previous Conservative government. And what did they do with that surplus? They turned it into a $150 billion debt. It's also important to note, Mr. Speaker, that we have a plan. We've been articulating that plan since the campaign. That plan includes an historic investment in infrastructure and helping reducing the burden for middle-class Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We're going to grow the economy and create jobs.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, Canadians didn't vote for this. During the campaign, the Liberals promised Canadians that they would cap their borrowing at $10 billion, and the Liberals have broken their promise. Now we've learned that they're borrowing $30 billion. And next week's numbers, who knows? Mr. Speaker, after the Conservatives left the Prime Minister's surplus, why is he borrowing money that he doesn't have on a recession we're not in with no plan to pay it back?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we have a plan, and we're very committed to that plan. That plan is to make sure not only do we help small businesses, not only do we help the economy grow, but we have an innovation plan that will make us more productive, that will make us more competitive. And that is why many businesses from across this country are supporting our plan, because they understand that we're making key investments to grow the economy, to create jobs. Not only investing in infrastructure and helping the middle class, the Canada Child Benefit will help hundreds of thousands of Canadians out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan, and we're going to remain committed to that plan.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, looking forward to Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has broken yet another promise. He said provinces would decide if they wanted a carbon tax. But now he's going to impose a carbon tax on every province, whether they want one or not. Canadians are already struggling, so why is the Prime Minister piling on more taxes when they fill up their cars and heat their homes?
Please. The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were very clear when we were elected that we were going to take real action to tackle climate change, unlike the previous government. But don't just take it from me that a carbon tax is the most efficient way to tackle emissions. Suncor CEO, we think climate change is happening. We think a broad-based carbon price is the right answer. Someone else the Conservative Party might remember, well-known Conservative Preston Manning, who said that he wholeheartedly supports carbon pricing. We're going to take action because it's the right thing to do.
Député de Beauce.
Monsieur le Président, après à peine 100 jours, le Parti libéral et le ministre des Finances a rompu un autre de ses engagements électoraux. On devait avoir un petit déficit de 10 milliards de dollars. On devait avoir un déficit non permanent. Qu'est-ce que nous avons? Un déficit de plus de 25 milliards de dollars, déficit permanent. Et adieu l'équilibre budgétaire. On a remis l'équilibre budgétaire au calendrier grec. Monsieur le Président, est-ce que le Premier ministre et le ministre des Finances peuvent avoir la décence de s'excuser auprès des Canadiens pour les avoir trompés durant la campagne électorale?
Honorable ministre des Transports.
Monsieur le Président, lors de la dernière élection, les Canadiens ont eu un choix entre un plan pour faire croître l'économie ou des coupures pour atteindre l'équilibre budgétaire à tout prix. Ils ont choisi la croissance et un appui à la classe moyenne. Imaginez l'alternative. Les partis d'opposition seraient en train de faire des coupures budgétaires au pire moment. Cela mènerait à des pertes d'emplois. Cela mènerait à des compressions de programmes dans toutes les régions du pays. Cela pourrait mener même à une récession. Les Canadiens ont fait le bon choix.
L'honorable député de Beauce.
Monsieur le Président, on s'aperçoit que leur plan, c'est de faire peur aux Canadiens. Leur plan était de dépenser 10 milliards de dollars. Et maintenant, c'est plus que 10 milliards de dollars. Ils veulent dépenser et endetter les Canadiens en sachant que le taux d'endettement des ménages est à 160 % de leurs revenus disponibles. La carte de crédit, elle est pleine. Ce n'est pas le temps d'endetter les Canadiens. Et j'aimerais leur dire comment endetter plus les Canadiens va créer de la richesse.
Honorable ministre des Transports.
Monsieur le Président, après des années de faible croissance, notre gouvernement a une approche fondamentalement différente de celle des conservateurs sur la gestion de l'économie canadienne. Nous sommes conscients que beaucoup de Canadiens et de Canadiennes éprouvent des problèmes particuliers en raison de récents ralentissements économiques. Ce ralentissement signifie que notre plan est plus important que jamais. Nous stimulerons l'économie, nous créerons des emplois, nous remettrons le Canada sur la bonne voie. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, we lost another young person in Moose Factory this week. That brings the number of over 600 young people who've killed themselves or tried to kill themselves in the northern part of my riding since 2009, and requests for suicide and depression counseling are regularly turned down by government. This week, Mushkegowuk and Anishinaabe Nation declared a state of emergency. They need action now. I'm asking the government, will they meet with the leaders, Jonathan Solomon, Isidore Day, Alvin Fiddler, and commit to a comprehensive plan to end this systemic discrimination?
Hear, hear. Honorable ministre du Développement social.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Member of Parliament for his dedication and his interest in this important topic. Our government acknowledges the scope and seriousness of the health and mental health issues faced by our Northern Ontario communities and elsewhere in Canada. Federal, provincial, and First Nations partners are working strongly together to address these complex issues of mental illness and suicide, addictions, chronic disease, and improving access to quality health care needed by everyone in Canada, and in particular by our Indigenous communities.
The member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank the member for the answer, but a nation-to-nation relationship needs a commitment from the leadership to meet. Because ever since the government of Paul Martin, everyone in Ontario has received an annual 6% increase in health transfer payments, and First Nations got nothing like that. But what they do have, the highest rheumatic fever rates in the world, Hep C, a suicide pandemic, children with parasite bacteria infections. So I'm asking this government, what commitment will they make to close that gap in the coming budget for health care, and why will they not meet with the leadership now and commit to ending this discrimination once and for all?
Hear, hear. The Minister of Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, I thank again the honourable member for his sensitivity to this very important issue. He has heard over the last few weeks and over the last few months this government's commitment to working on a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples in order to make progress on the issues that are most important to them, including health. Our government is again working with our partners everywhere in Canada, including provincial, territorial governments, to provide effective, sustainable and inclusive services for our Indigenous communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député d'Hochelaga.
Monsieur le Président, beaucoup trop de nos concitoyens des Premières Nations vivent dans des conditions exécrables. La crise actuelle dans le nord de l'Ontario en est que le dernier exemple. C'est inacceptable et intolérable. Nous avons le devoir de leur venir en aide et de réparer des décennies, voire des siècles d'injustice. Est-ce que le gouvernement s'engagera dans le prochain budget à financer les services de santé aux Premières Nations au même niveau que ceux des autres Canadiens?
Ben oui.
Honorable ministre du Développement social.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Madame la députée, pour votre intervention. Je reconnais votre sensibilité à un besoin très important pour nos communautés autochtones. Notre gouvernement, comme vous le savez, reconnaît l'importance et le sérieux des défis de santé physique et mentale auxquels font face nos communautés autochtones dans le nord de l'Ontario et partout au Canada. Notre gouvernement travaille étroitement avec les provinces, les territoires, les municipalités et les Premières Nations pour améliorer de manière très importante et sérieuse les conditions de vie de nos communautés autochtones. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Honorable député d'Hochelaga.
Monsieur le Président, l'ancien chef de cabinet du premier ministre conservateur sortant, l'ancien greffier du conseil privé, des syndicats, les groupes étudiants pressent le gouvernement d'adopter un nouveau mode de représentation proportionnelle. Le premier ministre s'est engagé à ce que l'élection d'octobre 2015 soit la dernière sous le mode actuel. Mais depuis, rien. Au NPD, nous avons proposé la création d'un comité qui inclurait tous les partis ayant fait élire des députés aux dernières élections. Est-ce que la ministre acceptera notre proposition pour enfin passer à l'action sans partisanerie?
The Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, we are pleased to see an emerging consensus on this issue where even our Conservative colleagues agree that the status quo must end. We look forward to engaging in a meaningful conversation with Canadians that ensures that all voices are heard.
The honourable member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister has told us that there's going to be a cost to the Canadian taxpayer, $1.2 billion, for their tax scheme, which gives a Canadian family about under $550. Yesterday, the Premier of Ontario, the Prime Minister's bestie, announced that she's going to put a 4.5 cent tax on a litre of gasoline. It's about $900 a year for Canadian families. So much for the plan. One Liberal government gives, the other one takes away. But my question is this, Mr. Speaker. Does he realize, or is it the plan, that he's using the federal credit card in order to pay the Ontario Liberal bill?
Great point. The honourable appointed Secretary for Finance.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais remercier ma collègue. Monsieur le Président, ce gouvernement a un plan pour la classe moyenne. Monsieur le Président, déjà en décembre, ce gouvernement s'est engagé à réduire l'impôt de la classe moyenne, Monsieur le Président. Nous allons continuer dans le prochain budget en faisant des investissements historiques en infrastructure, en innovation, en productivité. Monsieur le Président, ce gouvernement est le gouvernement de la classe moyenne. C'est sur cette base-là qu'on a été élus. C'est comme ça qu'on va continuer. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Honourable member for Milton.
So, Mr. Speaker, it's called a carbon tax. Ontario's bringing it in. It's 4.5 cents on a litre of gas, which means a lot to the people who haul our trade in this country, like the truck drivers in Brampton and Milton, my part of the world. 9 consecutive years of a deficit for Kathleen Wynne's government and a big tax coming at the end. Is that what we're going to expect from these guys as well, Mr. Speaker? All these deficits leading to nothing but burying Canadians in taxes.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Honourable for a question. The one thing we will never take is lessons from this previous government about deficit, Mr. Speaker. That's for sure. Let me tell you that. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to invest in the economy, and that's exactly what we're going to do. But, Mr. Speaker, we were clear with Canadians in October. We will do that responsibly. We will continue to reduce our debt-to-GDP ratio toward our mandate, and we still have the goal to balance the budget. That's a responsible government, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Maguen-Éclairable.
Des belles paroles, Monsieur le Président, parce que malgré tout ce qu'on entend, ce gouvernement n'a aucun plan pour stimuler et créer des emplois. En plus, ils ignorent ceux qui ont des projets. Par exemple, le préfet de la MRC des Appalaches, le maire de Thetford Mines sont incapables de rencontrer les membres du gouvernement. Ils veulent présenter un projet d'expansion du réseau de gaz naturel qui pourrait servir à consolider les emplois de 1300 travailleurs, Monsieur le Président. Peuvent-ils nous dire quand ils vont les rencontrer? Il est où leur plan pour développer les régions du Québec?
The Minister for Innovation.
Speaker, we're an open and transparent government, and our doors are always open. We will work with anyone who has a plan to grow the economy and create jobs. And that is why we've made investments in different sectors, not only in Quebec, but across Canada. Let me name a few, Mr. Speaker. Aerospace, automotive, business services, chemicals and plastics, digital media, financial services, food and beverage, medical devices, mining industries, oil and gas, renewable energy, retail and software, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to invest in the economy, we'll continue to grow the economy, and we'll make sure we have good quality jobs.
The honourable member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Liberal government spends billions of dollars outside of Canada on the Prime Minister's vanity projects, Hundreds of thousands of Canadians are losing their jobs right here at home. And to make matters worse, the Minister of Environment is proposing a punishing carbon tax grab which will raise the price of everything, including gas, groceries, housing. Provinces and territories like Saskatchewan and Yukon have resoundingly said no to a carbon tax. When will the minister finally listen and abandon her foolish plan to tax Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last election, we were elected to tackle climate change. The previous government did nothing. 80% of Canadians currently live or will live in a jurisdiction where the provinces have taken leadership to put a price on carbon. But once again, don't take it from me. Mark Cameron, who you might remember, former policy advisor to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. The most effective way to reduce emissions is to price them through a carbon fee.
Order. 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 There are some former Prime Ministers we can mention by name, but not those who still are in this House, as the member knows. The Minister of Environment has a few more seconds for her answer.
Sorry, the former advisor to the former Prime Minister, as most free market economists recognize, the most effective way to reduce emissions is to price them through a carbon fee or carbon trading system and let the market find.
The Honourable Member for Portage Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, the mining sector is a major source of jobs for Canadians, especially in rural and remote communities, and especially for Indigenous people. But this important sector is being hit hard by low commodity prices, and now more than ever they are counting on the mining exploration tax credit, something our government proudly supported and renewed each year for 9 years. Can the Minister of Natural Resources tell the people whose jobs depend on the mining in Canada if the mining exploration tax credit will be continued and expanded by the Liberal government? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, you can imagine how warmly I welcome a question on the mining industry and how much I'm looking forward to an upcoming meeting in Toronto to meet with the prospectors and developers and with Canadian companies who are leading on the global stage, particularly on sustainable practices in mining. Our government recognizes the important contribution of Canada's exploration and mining sector to our economy and to communities. Industry groups have stressed the importance of renewing the mineral exploration tax credit, and we are considering it as the upcoming budget approaches.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal platform attempted to raise revenue by taxing gains on stock options as income rather than capital gains. However, they forgot that doing so would allow corporations offering those stock options to deduct them, something they can't do now. Economist Jack Mintz said the net result would be a reduction in revenue. Mr. Speaker, has the government actually found an innovative way to reduce government revenue while raising taxes?
The Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, the members asked this question a few times, and I've told them that through our initiatives, we've been engaged with the different businesses. But when I talk to those businesses, they are very supportive of our innovation agenda. They appreciate the fact that not only are we investing in startups, but we're helping them scale up. We're creating an environment for SMEs to succeed not only in Canada, but globally. And that we're doing so through investments, through R&D, through our Industrial Research Assistance Program. These are the commitments we made in our platform when we talked about our innovation agenda. These are the commitments we're going to honor to grow our economy, Mr. Speaker.
Monsieur le Président, depuis l'élection, les libéraux sèment la confusion sur leurs promesses concernant la marijuana. Hier, la Cour fédérale de la Colombie-Britannique a déclaré inconstitutionnel un règlement sur le cannabis mis en place par l'ancien gouvernement. Les consommateurs avaient retiré le droit aux consommateurs de marijuana à des fins thérapeutiques de cultiver leurs plants à la maison. Ma question est simple. Est-ce que la ministre de la Justice a l'intention de respecter le jugement?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decision that came down yesterday from the courts only concerns medical marijuana, and it's very important to assist the member opposite in clearing up some of the confusion they're apparently experiencing, that this ruling in no way affects the existing criminal prohibition on the possession, production, and trafficking of marijuana for non-medical purposes. The decision was delivered yesterday, is being reviewed by staff from both the Minister of Health and the Minister of Justice, who will be advising this government shortly.
The honourable member for Victoria.
This government's sowing confusion left and right on marijuana. They promised to legalize it, but they offer no timeline. When the chiefs of police complained this was creating uncertainty, the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Justice helpfully cleared things up. He said, well, the current approach of criminalizing people for possession is failing, but the government's still going to continue the current approach indefinitely. Why doesn't this government clear up the confusion and simply decriminalize personal possession of marijuana immediately?
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
I thank the member for Victoria for his question and the opportunity to clear up his confusion. The government has been very clear and unequivocal. We have a very clear plan to legalize, regulate, and restrict the access of marijuana. And we want to remind all Canadians that until that important work is completed, the only control that is in place is the current criminal sanction for the production and the trafficking of marijuana, and those laws remain in effect.
The honourable member for Simcoe Grey.
Mr. Speaker, Health Canada spends hundreds of millions of dollars every year to encourage Canadians to stop smoking. Now the government wants Canadian kids to have access to a drug to smoke, marijuana. Now, parents are scared and concerned for their children. The government is sending out mixed signals. On the one hand, they claim that they want to enforce the law. But on the other hand, they've not appealed the BC decision to allow marijuana in the hands of children. I'd like to ask the Minister of Health if she'll take responsibility for this action and compel her colleague, the Minister of Justice, to appeal this decision. Will she step forward with me to protect Canadian kids from this mind-altering drug?
The honourable parliamentary secretary, the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is vitally important that those who need marijuana for medical use, as prescribed by the medical professional, must be able to have access to it. And I would like to quote the court case specifically. In Section 1, Paragraph 2, it states, the case is not about legalization of marijuana generally or the liberalization of its recreation or lifestyle use, nor it is about the commercialization of marijuana for such purposes.
The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are making a mess out of the marijuana file, and it's just one more example of Liberal incoherence. They say the pot is illegal, but it should be sold in liquor stores. Police chiefs across this country are asking for clarity on whether or not they should enforce the law. Now, we know marijuana is dangerous for kids, but yet in Vancouver there are now more pot shops than there are Starbucks. Mr. Speaker, what is the Liberal plan to keep marijuana out of the hands of our children?
The honourable parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to have another opportunity to clear up some of the confusion and apparently this hazy fog that has descended over the members opposite. The science and the evidence is overwhelmingly clear that the best way to protect our kids, to get organized crime out of the business of selling marijuana in our communities, and to ensure a robust public health response is through strict regulation. That's what we're doing. We have a plan to consult with the provinces and territories, with scientific experts, and based our regulations on evidence and fact. We have been
The honourable member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, seniors are among Canada's most important groups. They've helped shape our country, build our country, but those suffering near the end of their lives and with dementia are some of the most vulnerable. The Liberal doctor-assisted suicide plan will put our seniors at risk, especially seniors with dementia. Mr. Speaker, why is the Minister of Health doing nothing to protect our vulnerable seniors?
The honourable parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would like to thank the members of the committee for their dedication in consulting with Canadians and key stakeholders on this complex issue. This is something that is extremely important and deeply personal to every Canadian. We will be examining this report closely as the government crafts an appropriate legislative response to the Supreme Court of Canada's ruling and the Carter versus Canada case. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, dans la délicate question de l'aide médicale à mourir, le Premier ministre a toujours vanté l'expérience québécoise et la loi québécoise. Et comme vous le savez, j'ai personnellement voté en faveur de cette loi-là. Maintenant, au Québec, un des fondements fondamentaux de cet élément-là, c'est l'accord de 18 ans et plus. Ça n'est pas permis pour les mineurs. Alors voilà que ce matin, le comité parlementaire ouvre la porte aux mineurs. Alors, Monsieur le Président, la question est simple. Est-ce que le gouvernement va ouvrir la porte aux soins de fin de vie aux mineurs canadiens?
Oui. Honorable secrétaire parlementaire pour la justice.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci à ce député-là pour les questions, mais aussi pour son travail sur le comité. Le travail du comité est très, très important. Ça va être très, très important dans le processus qu'on va suivre à essayer de trouver l'équilibrité entre la dignité personnelle, les droits des médecins et des infirmières. Il y a beaucoup d'autres étapes à compléter. Le débat ici, le débat au comité et le débat au Sénat. Il y aura beaucoup d'autres occasions de participer.
The honourable member for Regina-Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, during the election, the Prime Minister accused the Conservatives of being, quote, unreasonably or unhealthily attached to the F-35. But now it seems it's the Liberals who are unreasonably and unhealthily attached to the F-35. Why is this government spending $45 million taxpayer dollars to remain in the Joint Strike Fighter program if it isn't going to buy the aircraft? Or are the Liberals about to break another promise?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question. To be part of the program, as the member knows, the previous government, the industrial benefits that it also brings. But while our government remains in the partnership with this program, it does not commit Canada to buy the F-35. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Laurier-Sainte-Marie.
Monsieur le Président, pendant la campagne électorale, le chef du Parti libéral avait été catégorique. S'il était élu, le Canada n'achèterait pas de chasseurs furtifs F-35. Mais là, on apprend que le gouvernement s'apprête à débourser plus de 45 millions de dollars pour poursuivre sa participation au programme d'avions de combat interarmés F-35. J'aimerais ça comprendre. Pourquoi est-ce que le ministre dépense notre argent pour des F-35 qu'il ne veut pas acheter?
Exactement.
Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I think I answered that question just earlier, is that being part of this program, it brings industrial benefits for Canadian companies, and being part of this program, it does not commit Canada to buy the F-35. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Surrey Centre.
Mr. Speaker, seniors in my riding of Surrey Centre who rely wholly on old age security and are struggling to make ends meet have not received an increase in their old age security in years. They're wondering if the Government of Canada plans to provide any relief. Will the Minister of Family and Social Development update this House on this government's efforts in helping to provide seniors the much-needed assistance?
Minister of Family and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank sincerely the member for his very important question. I am delighted to remind the House that this government is committed to providing seniors with a very secure retirement. We will restore to 65 the age of eligibility to old age security, well before the planned increase by the previous government. This will put an average of $13,000 back into the pockets of our most vulnerable seniors, and will ensure that our seniors stay out of poverty.
L'honorable député de Lévis-Lotbinière.
Monsieur le Président, chaque jour qui passe nous fait réaliser quel point il est difficile d'obtenir des réponses de ce gouvernement en matière d'éthique. Encore mardi, ils ont évité les questions à propos de la ministre de la Justice et de son mari, lobbyiste pour l'administration financière des Premières Nations. On va essayer à nouveau, Monsieur le Président. La ministre de la Justice peut-elle confirmer à cette Chambre qu'elle va se récuser de toute discussion lorsqu'il est question de programmes destinés aux autochtones?
Monsieur le Président, je peux confirmer pour mon collègue que la ministre de la Justice va suivre très méticuleusement tous les conseils que la conseillère à l'éthique va mettre en place. Je suis content d'informer mes collègues que ces mesures sont maintenant en place et elle va les suivre d'une façon rigoureuse comme elle a toujours fait.
The honourable member for Chilliwack Hope.
Mr. Speaker, before her election, the Justice Minister was the chair of the First Nations Financial Authority. They've just hired her husband to lobby the federal government. The FNFA receives monies from the federal government, approved by the federal cabinet, and is governed by federal statutes that she oversees. Her husband's lobbying on this file clearly puts her in a conflict. This isn't a matter for the Ethics Commissioner, it's a matter of common sense. When will the Justice Minister do the right thing, stop the excuses, and put an end to this obvious conflict of interest?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what would be helpful if the members opposite put an end to the drive-by smears? What we've said from the beginning, Mr. Speaker, is the Minister of Justice proactively raised this issue with the Ethics Commissioner, as somebody of her high integrity should do. The Ethics Commissioner has now provided a structure and advice to avoid not only a conflict of interest, but the appearance of a conflict of interest, and that's the advice that she's always going to follow.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's actually deeper than that. In fact, the Justice Minister was the chairman of the First Nations Financial Authority until she was elected and ascended into cabinet. As she stepped out, her husband stepped in as a lobbyist. How can the Liberals continue to defend this minister?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we're going to proudly continue to defend a minister of such outstanding integrity. The member is clearly struggling with a very basic concept. When an issue like this arises, the appropriate thing to do is to ask the Ethics Commissioner, an independent officer of this Parliament, for her advice and to follow that advice. It's something that the member opposite is struggling with, and I would advise him, as I did earlier this week, to meet with her and she could explain to him how it actually works.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the cozy ties between the Government House Leader and the Irving family run very deep.
Yes, they do.
We now know that the Government House Leader appointed his good friend Kevin Fram as senior advisor in his office. Conveniently, just a few short days after, Mr. Fram was lobbied by Irving. When it comes to dealing with the Irving family, it's clear to everyone that the Government House Leader's so-called ethical screen is full of holes. How is this not clear to the House Leader?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite seems to be a fan of Phoebe Gilman's book, Something from Nothing. Yes. The first 100 days of my mandate, I was very busy, Mr. Speaker. I traveled from coast to coast to coast and had meetings with many key stakeholders. These individuals included provincial and territorial ministers, Indigenous leaders, conservation and fisheries stakeholders, as well as industry. Mr. Speaker, at the time of these meetings, this fine individual was a public servant for my department and was attending these meetings as my acting chief.
The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada's inflation rate rose 2% in January, the highest rate increases in more than 2 years. Gas prices were the biggest contributor to this raise. Even the Bank of Canada has noted that falling oil prices haven't been matched by lower prices at the pump. The government has a role in preventing price fixing and collusion. So will the Liberals agree with our proposal for an oil and gas price ombudsman and a petroleum monitoring agency like they have before so that we can finally end this gouging at the pumps?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for his thoughtful question. This is a concern that during the campaign, when we're knocking on doors, we heard from different constituents. I look forward to working with the member opposite to finding a solution to make sure that consumers do not get gouged, that we make sure that we have a fair process, a competitive process, where consumers have good choices to make, and I look forward to finding a solution with the member opposite.
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, just last week, the Fisheries Committee approved a study on the imminent closure of the Comox MCTS. Yet the minister seems to have already made up his mind. By implementing the Conservatives' reckless policy on closing MCTS centres, this Liberal government is putting the safety of boaters, shipping, and the environment at risk. Will the minister do the responsible thing and wait for the findings of the committee before deciding on the future of this vital centre?
Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've said many times, the Canadian Coast Guard has modernized its Marine Communications and Traffic Services Centre with 21st technology. We are moving forward with that plan. That equipment is working, and the committee will do its work, and I look forward. I'm sure that they'll come to the same conclusions that we have, that the system is working and the coverage is exactly the same as it was before. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, it's worse than just one meeting. The government's House Leader's new advisor isn't really new at all, especially when it comes to dealing with the Irving family. Kevin Fram has already been in hot water for trips he accepted to the Irving fish camp. Now he's working for the senior New Brunswick minister who's supposed to have no dealings with the Irvings at all. Mr. Speaker, how can this minister have an ethical screen for the Irvings when both he and his senior staff are so closely tied to them?
The honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's another fan of Phoebe Gilman's book, Something from Nothing, on the other side there. Mr. Speaker, these two meetings, I attended one of these meetings on the 17th of January with Mr. Fram, and it involved a not-for-profit organization called CAST, or Collaboration for Atlantic Salmon Tomorrow. The other meeting, Mr. Speaker, involving my acting chief of staff, Mr. Fram, was on January 20th, where it was a high-level meeting on shipbuilding that I asked him to attend on my behalf because I was in meetings in Quebec City. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Monsieur le Président, on savait déjà que le gouvernement invente tous les jours une nouvelle phase de son plan pour combattre l'État islamique. Ce plan s'éparpille de la Jordanie au Liban, de la Syrie en Irak. Hier, au Sénat, le ministre de la Défense a affirmé que ce plan de guerre s'étend maintenant en Afrique. Est-ce que le ministre peut dire dans quel pays nos soldats combattront et comment justifier ça sans avoir l'approbation du Parlement?
Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, as we clearly stated about our plan for mission in Iraq, it was not just to take it in Iraq itself, we were taking a regional process, and that's why it was a comprehensive plan. And my comments, I'm glad that the member listened to my statements in the Senate, because he would have realized that I was talking about that we will also always consult with our allies for the threats that are around the world. And that's exactly what we are doing right now, and we know a decision will be made. And when a time comes, we will always take an open and transparent process to consult Parliament and move forward with that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Monsieur le Président, le ministre de la Défense est un champion de l'improvisation. Après avoir eu une discussion avec la ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'Italie à Bruxelles, voilà qu'il déplace l'effort de guerre du Canada contre l'État islamique vers la Libye. À Washington, un haut fonctionnaire du gouvernement américain nous a expliqué récemment que ce n'était pas une bonne idée pour le Canada d'aller en Libye à cause de la présence, entre autres, d'un autre groupe terroriste, Boko Haram. Qu'est-ce que les soldats canadiens vont aller faire en Libye, Monsieur le Président?
Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, our government and our security forces will always look at threats around the world, not just Libya and other places, because this is what responsible security forces do, and we'll continue to do that. And I look forward to all those conversations that I myself will have with my counterparts from around the world to look at the threats, to making sure not just that we as keep Canadians safe, but also to keep our allies safe as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And I have to take this Sudbury.
Monsieur le Président, en 2015, plus de 350 000 étudiants internationaux ont dépensé plus de 10 milliards de dollars au Canada et généré 90 000 emplois pour les Canadiens. Dans ma circonscription de Sudbury, l'Université Laurentienne est un important créateur d'emplois et permet à la communauté de bénéficier de la présence d'étudiants venant de partout à travers le monde. La ministre du Commerce international peut-elle informer cette Chambre de ses initiatives pour maintenir le statut du Canada en tant que destination de choix pour les étudiants internationaux?
Honorable ministre du Commerce international.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Une partie importante de mon mandat est la promotion de la marque canadienne à l'étranger. C'est pourquoi j'étais si fière d'accueillir la nouvelle image de marque du Canada en matière d'éducation EduCanada. La marque a été élaborée de concert avec les provinces et les territoires dans le but d'attirer les étudiants étrangers les plus brillants et qui agiront comme ambassadeurs pour le Canada. Nous continuerons de vanter la qualité d'une éducation canadienne. Merci.
The honourable member for Carleton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Mr. Speaker, transportation is fundamental to Canada's economic performance. For a government that is lacking in policies and standing in the way of job creation, the Canada Transportation Act review provides a clear opportunity to leverage our national transportation systems into a strong economy. The Minister has had this report since December 21st. With the review now tabled, how is the Minister going to use it so that industries across Canada can create jobs?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the question, and I was delighted to be able to table the Canada Transportation Act review this morning. In fact, it was initiated by the previous government, and we're glad to put it out. I made a special point of getting it out there so that stakeholders could look at it as early as possible, and that is what they are going to be doing. And we will also be consulting stakeholders throughout the rest of this year, and we will come forward with recommendations that we decide that are appropriate for the next 20 to 30 years for Canada's transportation system. Thank you.
Honorable député de Longueuil-Saint-Aubert.
Monsieur le Président, cette semaine au Parlement, on a accueilli des créateurs, des acteurs, des hommes et des femmes qui travaillent sans relâche pour que notre télévision et nos films nous ressemblent, que ce soit nos histoires. Mais avec les nouvelles règles du CRTC qui entreront en vigueur la semaine prochaine, ce sont des milliers d'emplois qui sont en jeu. Avec leur courte vue habituelle, les conservateurs avaient promis que ces changements se feraient sans perte d'emploi, bien sûr, mais on sait tous que les libéraux sont comme atteints d'une espèce de consultite aiguë. Là. Ça fait 4 mois et demi, précisément. Alors, à part de jaser, quelles mesures concrètes la ministre va-t-elle prendre pour protéger les travailleurs et artisans de la télévision?
Honorable ministre du Patrimoine canadien.
Merci, M. le Président. Merci à mon collègue pour sa question. Je suis contente qu'il ait eu l'occasion de rencontrer plusieurs créateurs et personnes de l'industrie. D'ailleurs, j'ai eu l'occasion également de rencontrer plusieurs créateurs. Je suis très, très sensible à leurs enjeux parce que je comprends, mon équipe et moi, nous comprenons très bien que les changements technologiques, à terme, ont des impacts sur plusieurs acteurs de l'industrie. Et voilà pourquoi nous devons nous assurer de comprendre comment bien faire la transition d'un modèle analogue à un modèle numérique. Et dans les circonstances, voilà pourquoi, alors que nous allons réinvestir dans nos créateurs, nous allons également consulter pour nous assurer...
The Honourable Member for Toronto-Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is preparing to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Confederation. In her mandate letter, the Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage was given the task of championing government-wide efforts to celebrate this important anniversary. Can the Minister share with this House some of the steps her department is taking to get ready for Canada's sesquicentennial?
Hey, well done, Julie.
Canadian Heritage.
Merci, M. le Président. Merci à ma collègue pour sa question. Mon équipe et moi travaillons très fort, bien entendu, sur l'organisation du 150e anniversaire de la Confédération et nous allons privilégier, bien entendu, une approche pan-gouvernementale qui rejoint des Canadiens au sein de toutes les communautés au pays. Et différents projets ont été annoncés déjà, notamment les grands voiliers et les dômes multimédia de Sesquick qui vont aller à travers le pays. Et au cours des prochaines semaines, j'aurai d'autres annonces au niveau des initiatives que nous allons entreprendre afin de célébrer tous ensemble le 150e anniversaire de notre Confédération.
Honourable Member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Transport Minister just stood up in this House and he says that we're going to have consultations and to make recommendations on recommendations based on consultations. Mr. Speaker, at some point, this government is going to have to stand up and actually do things. The reason that we had the expedited review of this act was to ensure that grain could move. What we saw is that it wasn't moving. Now, if the minister only commits to more recommendations and consultations and consultations and recommendations, farmers want to know, when will they finally have access to rail services?
Honourable Minister of Transport.
Well, my honourable colleague is a little bit confused, so let me clarify it for him. The grain is moving, by the way, but at the moment, what we are going to do is to present to Canadians and about 300 important stakeholders what this report looked at for the past 18 months. We will ask them what their opinion is, and we will make the decisions later on this year how to go forward on Canada's national transportation system. So stand by, it's coming soon. Thank you.
Maintenant, député de Pierre-Boucher, le Pétrate-Verchères.
Monsieur le Président, 1800 emplois perdus chez AVS, 2400 chez Bombardier, 1000 chez Bell Hélicoptère et 300 autres chez CAE. Et ce, sans compter tous les fournisseurs qui sont aux prises avec des inquiétudes et qui s'inquiètent pour leur survie. Le gouvernement s'est précipité à aller soutenir l'industrie automobile de l'Ontario il y a quelques années. Cette semaine, il vole au secours de l'Alberta. Mais, dans ce cas, comment le gouvernement peut-il justifier son manque d'empressement quand c'est l'industrie aéronautique du Québec qui est en question?
Monsieur le Président, je comprends l'importance de l'industrie aérospatiale. Nous sommes engagés dans un dialogue avec Bombardier. Nous prenons le temps nécessaire pour une décision de cette importance. Merci beaucoup.
L'honorable député de Bécancour-Nicolet-Sorel.
Monsieur le Président, parlons-en d'Air Canada. En vertu de la loi sur Air Canada, c'est la totalité de la flotte que la compagnie doit entretenir chez nous. Ça représente 408 avions, dont plusieurs nécessitent de l'entretien lourd dès maintenant. En changeant la loi, le ministre veut troquer ces emplois garantis par un hypothétique centre d'entretien qui s'occuperait peut-être de 45 avions lorsqu'ils auront besoin d'être remis à neuf dans 10 ans. Plutôt que de nous répéter que c'est une bonne nouvelle, le ministre peut-il appliquer la loi qu'il a maintenant?
Honorable ministre des Transports.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et comme je l'ai dit bien des fois, on se réjouit du fait que Air Canada a décidé d'acheter 45 avions Bombardier avec une option pour 30 de plus, et aussi qu'il a décidé de soutenir l'implantation d'un centre d'excellence où l'entretien de ces avions canadiens se feront durant au moins les 20 prochaines années. Ça va créer des emplois, c'est bon pour l'industrie aérospatiale. Le Québec s'en réjouit, le Canada s'en réjouit. On devrait applaudir cette bonne manœuvre. Merci.